Hello folks, it's me again, Amanda Enderman, your trusty tour guide in the wonders of the wonderful city, also known as Rio de Janeiro. Who remembers that classic picture in hospitals where normally you have a woman dressed as a nurse going like, shh? I put it there because on this video I'm gonna talk about health and medicine in Imperial Rio. I've already spoken about how it was back in colonial times. Now I'm gonna talk about how it progressed in imperial times. But before I get right onto the theme of the video, I have to remind you that I'm currently offering walking tours through the city of Rio, and all of them are described on my website, which link will be in the description box below, as always in the first fixed comment. So all you have to do is click there, make your reservations, and for that you gotta text me via WhatsApp. That's very important. And let's get to know the city of Rio in person, folks, with me, Amanda Enderman, your trusty tour guide, of course. So now without further ado, let's get right on to the theme of the video. Whenever you talk about health, especially public health, you have to talk about something very important, which is hygiene. As I mentioned back in the video where I talked about the passeio público, if there's one thing that virus and bacteria and microbes and parasites and all of that simply love, and they have a field day with it, is wherever there is filth. By all means, if you want to stay healthy, one of the things you have to do is stay clean. Bathe regularly, brush your teeth regularly, mind your skincare. So firstly, I'm gonna talk about sanitation. Back in colonial times, as I mentioned before, things were very precarious in that sense. Garbage was collected in carriages, and the population was required to keep their houses and the terrain which surrounded them in a distance of 30 paces clean. And by the law of 1835, the government was now authorized to, if there were no sewage services being offered, they could hire John Frederick Russell. I mentioned him before in the video where I talked about the neighborhood of Gloria, a very famous engineer in regards to sanitation here in Rio, or they could hire any other in order to take care of the services of sewage in houses and river waters. And then in 1840, the transportation which was done by the Tigers, I spoke about them in the video about the passeio público, those poor slaves which carried the excrement from their masters in buckets, which would leak. But finally, this transport of excrement started being done in vehicles. Finally, some progress. And then in 1842, a French gentleman called Monsieur Gravasset, I don't speak French, so if I'm pronouncing it wrong, please forgive me, I'm pretty sure I am, was authorized by the city hall to have the cleaning company organized by him be responsible for the transportation of all manner of excrement and all of that in hermetically sealed barrels. Imagine what it used to be like when it wasn't hermetically sealed. It would go through the streets and oh, the smell! This excrement was gathered and taken to the beaches in ships, which would then toss it in the Guanabara Bay. Here's a warning for you. Don't go swimming in the Guanabara Bay. It's not suitable for that. I cannot stress this enough. Go to other beaches, Copacabana, Ipanema, Leblon, and the like, but don't go for a swim in the Guanabara Bay. You can go to the Flamengo beach to get a nice tan, to stay there, hang out at the beach, hang out at the grass, play sports and stuff, but don't go in the water. It's not safe for that. Then, in 1847, the central area of Rio, so the downtown area of Rio, was finally graced with the collecting of garbage twice a day, in the morning and in the afternoon.
But Amanda, what was it like before?
They collected it, yes, but only 3 times a week. The garbage gathering, whenever you see the garbage truck coming every day in order to get the garbage, thank your lucky stars that you're living in the 21st century. Finally, in 1852, the streets started being washed, hallelujah, but only where the carriages of the nobles would go by, typically, which was in the Caminho Novo de Botafogo, in the neighborhood of Botafogo, in the neighborhood of Catete, so Catete was a very lucky neighborhood in this sense, and in the road of the neighborhood of São Cristóvão. No wonder, there was the Imperial Palace there, so of course they would clean that. Then in 1855 was when the first experiments with sewage were carried out by Russell, and he actually had an excellent result, and because of this he won the right to explore this service in 1857. But go figure, he did nothing about it. Guess he gave up on that and transferred this privilege, I would say, to the Rio City Improvement Company in 1862. Go figure, you're going so well and then you give up. Moving on, actual public health in Imperial Rio, or as they would call it back then, the assistants. The good news is that there were plenty of other hospitals which were built either before in the 18th century or in the 19th century as well. So we no longer only had the Santa Casa, which I mentioned, by the way, in the video treating Rio in colonial times. In 1829, the Santa Casa became part of a land which belonged to the military hospital, and it had 2 resting rooms and also 2 well-ventilated infirmaries, one for white men and other for black men, or for dark-skinned men, I should say. However, the sick people there were mistreated and they were not kept warm enough. Other than that, there was the Lazarus Hospital, which was founded in 1741 by the Conde da Cunha and given in 1763 to the Sisterhood of Candelaria. This hospital was very much transferred along the decades until finally in 1833 it was opened again in the area of Gamboa. Curiously enough, in this hospital all of the patients were light-skinned and they presented a variety of leprosy known as, in Portuguese, elephantiase. I must confess that before researching for this video, I had no idea that this particular ailment was a variety of leprosy. And I would love to know if it's the same with you guys. So leave it in the comment section below. Let's exchange information with one another, shall we? That's what social media is for. By the way, since the decree of August 25th, 1832, the tax collectors of the ancestor of property tax were entrusted with gathering the voluntary contribution dedicated to this hospital of the Lazarus and to its upkeeping. Boy, oh boy, when people were paying property tax back then, they were also voluntarily contributing to this hospital. Other than that, there was the hospice of Dom Pedro II. A hospice meaning a hospital dedicated to the mentally ill. This hospital was created by the imperial government on the day that Dom Pedro II was crowned, but it was only actually opened in 1852.
But Amanda, what did they do with the mentally insane before that?
Before that, the mentally insane were just thrown in prison. There was also the hospital of the Third Order of the Minimals. I'm literally translating, but in Portuguese is Ordem Terceira dos Mínimos of Saint Francis of Paula, which was founded in April 1814 and started working here in Rio in 1828. Curiously enough, rich people preferred to be taken care of at home. They were repulsed by even the idea of being treated at the hospital. Can you imagine that? Nowadays it's basically the opposite. Oh, the good old days. And also, certain diseases at this time were notorious. One of these was yellow fever. There was a massive outbreak in Rio in 1849, which killed approximately 4,000 people. For the numbers of the time, it is a big number, trust me. And at the time, the government attributed this situation to the coming of slaves at the port of Rio, and also to the precarious conditions of the houses where the disease would spread. But this wasn't the only disease that plagued the population of Rio at this time, unfortunately. Among the notorious diseases of the 19th century, there was of course tuberculosis, very prevalent here as well, just as in the US and in Europe. Smallpox, unfortunately, was still rampant. Influenzas, rubella, and our very well-known, I wish we didn't know it, bubonic plague. And this would only be combated in an effective manner in the 20th century, but that's subject for a future video. Oh my goodness! I'm forgetting to talk about a very crucial detail: anesthesia! Remember when I talked about it in the Treating Rio back in colonial times? There was basically no anesthesia. At best, you would be given something to bite down while they were doing the operations, which would hurt like nobody's business. But gladly, in the 19th century, the first anesthesia came about here in Rio. Firstly, they used ether, and as a matter of fact, the very first anesthesia with ether was carried out in 1847 in the military hospital in Rio by Dr. Jorge Adoque Lobo. Shortly after, in 1848, came the anesthesia with chloroform, which was performed in the Santa Casa, also here in Rio. Both these procedures of anesthesia involved general anesthesia and carry out the operation. In all of the sources that I researched of this time, there was still no way of local anesthesia. When you had to have an invasive procedure, such as extracting something or pulling out a tooth even, or something like that, there was still no way of stopping the pain in those cases. This concludes this video about healthcare in the 1800s or Imperial Rio, and I hope you liked the video. And if you did like the video, be sure to hit that like button, then hit that subscribe button, but most importantly, hit multiple times on that share button so that each time more people may know about the wonders of the wonderful city. And as usual in this channel, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!